Chapter 5: The Nicotine Orgasm. Right and left brain and phobia explanations. If you're like most smokers, you probably already have strong views about why you smoke. This is natural. Smokers need strong views. Smoking is such a suicidal thing to do that not having strong views would drive smokers insane. Some smokers tell me they can stop whenever they want, and I believe them. Even without this book, stopping smoking is easy. Then again, jumping in the air is easy. Staying there isn't. You probably know people who've stopped smoking, but how many of them can say for sure that they'll never want to smoke again? Anyone can stop smoking, but very few people stop smoking without ever craving cigarettes again. Let's have a look at why you think you enjoy smoking. But before we talk about cigarettes, let's talk about pleasure. As any doctor will tell you, your body has never experienced pleasure, and it never will. Only your brain can experience pleasure. Your body simply sends chemical and electrical signals through your nervous system to your brain, and until these are interpreted, they don't actually mean anything. In fact, sometimes exactly the same physical sensation can mean two completely opposite things. Take an example. If you kiss someone you find sexually attractive, it's extremely pleasurable, isn't it? Not just emotionally, but physically pleasurable. But if you were to kiss someone you found repulsive, it would be physically unpleasant. But wait a second. In both cases, the actual physical sensation itself would be identical. So what's the difference? The difference is the context. It's pleasure by association. Because you associate sexual attraction with pleasure, part of your brain decides in advance to make you enjoy it. This response is automatic. You don't have any direct control over it, just like you don't have any direct control over wanting a cigarette. Right at the beginning of this book, I told you that you can't simply decide not to love someone. I told you it simply doesn't work like that. It's time for you to understand why. Let's take a look under the bonnet. You may or may not know that your brain is made up loosely of two halves, the left and right sides. They both do different things. The left side of your brain controls cognitive and conscious thought. When you're trying to figure out how long it will be until you can next have a smoking break or how many duty-frees you can afford, you're using the left side of your brain to think, make decisions, and so on. While you're awake, this part of you is active and dominant. Imagine a physical computer reacting to deliberate key presses. The left side of your brain is like this. When you go to sleep, so does this part of you. Then we have the right side of the brain. Your instinctive, emotional, and sexual reactions are based here. When you're attracted to someone, it's the right side of your brain that is controlling this impulse. If you have a phobia or any other hang-ups that seem to defy rational explanation, it's important to realize that these are based not in your conscious mind, but in your subconscious mind. This is precisely why the pull-yourself-together approach doesn't work with someone who has a phobia, even when they know the fear is irrational. If you've ever had a phobia, you already know this is true. Your fear of stopping smoking lives down here, in the dark, with all your other fears. Later, I'm going to switch the light on and we'll have a look at it together. What you see will amaze you. Your subconscious mind is part of what's known technically as your autonomic nervous system. In addition to controlling your emotions and instincts, this part of your brain monitors thousands of vital signs continually, such as your blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, hormone levels, your level of sexual arousal, and so on. It's this part of you that responds automatically to stress or fear by producing adrenaline, which raises your blood pressure and makes you physically tense and ready for action. And if your subconscious mind tells you to do something, it's doing it for a reason. Psychologists often call these reasons triggers. Usually, these triggers act in your favor, such as eating because you're hungry or sitting near a fire if you're cold. But occasionally, amongst all the millions of good triggers that find their way into your subconscious mind, a bad one gets in there by mistake. This can happen if you're traumatized, and it can happen if you're tricked. To make sure you understand how this works, let's take a look at the best-known type of bad trigger: phobias. The phobic trigger. Imagine this. A little girl gets bitten on the face by a puppy, which didn't mean to hurt her but was simply overexcited. The child panics, becoming terrified and agitated. At that exact instant, a phobic trigger is automatically created in her subconscious mind, a trigger linking dogs with pain and danger. She now has a phobia of dogs. That's all it took, a single moment of terror, and she is now continually scared of dogs. Of course, her subconscious mind doesn't see this as a phobia. It sees it as a perfectly logical reaction based on the traumatic experience. And this reaction is now hardwired into her brain, always there in the background, waiting to protect her from dogs, whether she likes it or not. Now, imagine this. The little girl grows up to become a highly successful businesswoman who is fully able to deal with a room full of clients or colleagues, a woman who is strong, intelligent, determined, and still terrified of dogs. She still panics when a dog comes near her, even though she thinks that this doesn't make sense. This is what a phobia is. It's a subconscious trigger that was created for all the right reasons, but which is no longer appropriate or helpful. Unfortunately, there's a problem. Because the trigger only exists in the woman's subconscious mind, it makes absolutely no difference that she consciously knows it is no longer appropriate or helpful. Even if the phobia embarrasses her, her panic reaction to dogs is exactly the same every time she sees one. It happens whether she wants it to happen or not. The reason for this is amazingly simple. It's because even though she only ever had one painful experience of a dog, the human subconscious mind always decides how to react to a potential threat based on the most terrifying memory it can find. When you consider that its sole function is to keep you alive, this makes perfect sense. It needs to react instantly. It doesn't have time to sit down and plow through every related memory it can find, so it simply assumes the worst-case scenario. Let me stress this point once again. It makes no difference how illogical a phobia seems to be. The subconscious mind isn't logical, it's automatic and instinctive. It needs to be in order to react immediately to potential threats. And this is why the woman can't simply let go of the phobia, because this trigger mechanism is a life or death response. Her subconscious mind can't just ignore this trigger, because its sole purpose is to protect her. Think about it this way. Would you want your subconscious mind to suddenly forget that fire is dangerous, or that driving your car at high speed into a wall is dangerous, or that smoking a cigarette somehow makes you feel more secure? Are you beginning to get it? Before we start talking about cigarettes, there's one more thing you need to know about your subconscious mind. In certain situations, it doesn't know the difference between a genuine memory and one you've imagined. This is why a nightmare can terrify you as much as the real thing. Have you ever had a bad dream about something that would have made you laugh if you'd been awake? Of course you have, we all have. But at the moment you woke up, your physical reaction was exactly the same as one produced by genuine danger or threat. Maybe you were sweating or shaking. Maybe you even cried out in your sleep. Why have I mentioned this? Because in the final chapter of this book, I'll teach you a technique that will create a completely new memory of smoking, one that your subconscious mind will treat as a real memory, one that will permanently change how cigarettes feel to you. Okay. It's taken me almost half of this book to make sure you understand how and why your brain reacts to certain things, but I promise you that not one word of this information has been wasted. Now, let's talk about cigarettes. What happens when you smoke? As you probably know, cigarette smoke contains a complicated cocktail of chemicals that includes carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, nicotine, ammonia, and benzene, all lethal poisons. If you tried to get away with dumping these chemicals at your local waste tip, you'd be arrested, fined, and possibly even end up in prison. And yet, as a smoker, not only are you prepared to breathe these chemicals into your lungs, but you're even prepared to pay for the privilege. Why? It's because each time you inhale cigarette smoke, your subconscious mind has been tricked into completely misunderstanding what's really happening. Let me explain why. When I first started trawling through all the scientific information about nicotine and smoking, almost immediately I made a surprising discovery, and it's this. Numerous scientific reports have noted that laboratory animals, such as monkeys and dogs, will only breathe cigarette smoke if they're absolutely forced to. And even when they've been forced to smoke thousands of cigarettes, they'll stop as soon as they physically can and do everything they can to avoid breathing cigarette smoke ever again. In other words, they're incapable of getting physical pleasure from smoking. The reason this surprised me so much is that for many years, I was absolutely, totally convinced that cigarettes were giving me some kind of genuine pleasure and relaxation. But I was wrong. So let me explain to you, once and for all, what really happens when you smoke a cigarette. When cigarette smoke enters your lungs, two things happen. Firstly, the carbon monoxide replaces oxygen in your bloodstream and makes you feel slightly dizzy and lightheaded. Your heart starts beating faster to replace the missing oxygen, and your blood pressure rises. You're suffering from temporary oxygen starvation. As a result, your central nervous system goes into a mild spasm, which you can feel all over. In fact, if you think of smoking as a sexual affair, this sensation is effectively the orgasm. It's the point of maximum intimacy between you and a cigarette. Unfortunately, you've been cheated. You got the build-up, you got the heavy breathing, you even got a feeling of calming down afterwards. But there was one thing you didn't get: pleasure. This might confuse you. Surely you do get physical pleasure from smoking. In fact, you don't get any such thing. To understand why, you need to finally learn the biggest secret about smoking, the nicotine trick.